Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm not presentable, so you're getting the other side of the camera. Drinking a glass of wine, and I've opened up my copy of Old Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott to a particular chapter. I finished reading this book an hour or so ago, and some of Alcott's narration near the end had me laughing. Because I've read a couple biographies of her now, I have a pretty good idea of her perspective on matrimony, on marriage, and a pretty good idea of the reason why some of her novels ended the way they did. In Little Women, Alcott was not keen for Jo to marry in the end. That's the reason why she didn't have Jo end up with Laurie, and she didn't want Jo to marry anyone. She wanted Jo to be a self-sufficient woman for the rest of her life, but pressure from her reading public and pressure from her publisher influenced her in the creation of Professor Bear, who Jo ended up at the end of Little Women. In Old Fashioned Girl, we have Alcott once again, settling for matrimony for her characters. But to use a modern term, it almost seems as though Alcott is throwing a bit of shade in the final chapters of this novel. I thought I would read a couple passages for you. So this is near the end of the novel. This shouldn't spoil too much because I'm just going to read a little bit. Here we go. Would be the most appropriate motto for this chapter. Tom's success would be the most appropriate motto for this chapter, because intimidated by the threats, denunciations, and complaints showered upon me in consequence of taking the liberty to end a certain story as I liked, I now yield to the amiable desire of giving satisfaction, and, at the risk of outraging all the unities, intend to pair off everybody I can lay my hands on. Occasionally a matrimonial epidemic appears, especially towards spring, devastating society, thinning the ranks of bachelordom, and leaving mothers lamenting for their fairest daughters. That spring the disease broke out with great violence in the Shaw circle, causing paternal heads such bewilderment as one case after another appeared with alarming rapidity. Fanny was stricken first. And so we have this passage where Alcott is comparing engagements to an epidemic. Marriage is an epidemic, which is quite funny knowing what I know about Alcott's own perspectives on marriage. And I'll just turn this away here so I don't spoil anything. But the final line of this novel, let's get this to focus here. I'm blocking the rest of this page so I don't spoil the ending. But Alcott ends with this line, and so they were married and all lived happily till they died. Which, when I read this line, I sort of added a little bit of something. I imagined Alcott writing this and saying, to use a modern phrase, and so they were married and all lived happily till they died, as if. It's almost like she's pinning on this happily ever after marriage ending with sarcasm. Sarcasm that a young reader of the time probably wouldn't have perceived. And maybe it's not there at all, and maybe I'm just reading into it because of the biographies I've read, but it made me laugh a bit. It was very, very sweet to get the ending to this novel that we got. This is a novel I'm going to talk about more in my Friday reads. But with that sweetness, with that beautiful happy ending, I also thought I perceived a bit of sarcasm on Alcott's part, a bit of humor.